You're not lazy. You're not weak. And you're not broken. You're mentally exhausted. This exhaustion doesn't show on the outside, but it drains everything on the inside: your focus, motivation, patience, and confidence. It makes simple tasks feel heavy and rest feel guilty. It convinces you that something is wrong with you, when in reality, your mind has just been carrying too much for too long. Chapter 1. The lie you've been telling yourself. Most people don't wake up one morning and decide they no longer care about their life. They don't consciously choose to lose ambition, stop trying, or drift away from the person they once hoped to become. Yet over time, many people arrive at a painful conclusion about themselves. They begin to believe they are lazy. This belief settles quietly into the mind, reinforced by unfinished tasks, delayed goals, and a constant sense of falling behind. The more this belief repeats, the more convincing it feels. But what if this story you've been telling yourself isn't true at all? Laziness is one of the most misunderstood labels in modern life. It's an easy explanation for something that feels complicated and overwhelming. When energy disappears and motivation feels unreachable, calling yourself lazy feels simple. It feels like an answer. But in reality, laziness is rarely the root problem. What most people are experiencing is something far deeper and far more human. They are mentally exhausted. Mental exhaustion doesn't look dramatic. It doesn't always show up as breakdowns or obvious distress. More often, it hides behind procrastination, numbness, and distraction. You still care. You still think about what you should be doing. You still imagine a better version of yourself. But when it's time to act, something inside you resists. You feel heavy. Focus slips away. Even small tasks feel harder than they should. And because you can't see a clear reason, you turn the blame inward. This kind of exhaustion doesn't come from doing nothing. It comes from doing too much without relief. It comes from constantly thinking, worrying, planning, and managing. It comes from holding emotions inside because life doesn't feel like it has room for them. Over time, your mind becomes overloaded. And when the mind is overloaded, it doesn't shut down completely. It slows you down as a form of protection. What looks like laziness is often your brain saying, "I can't keep operating at this pace without support." The modern world quietly encourages mental overload. You are expected to be available, productive, informed, and emotionally stable all at once. There is little space to pause and very little permission to struggle. Even rest often comes with guilt. You tell yourself you'll relax once everything is done, but everything is never done. So your mind stays alert, scanning for the next responsibility. This constant state of readiness drains energy in a way that sleep alone cannot repair. One of the most painful parts of mental exhaustion is how invisible it feels. You might look fine on the outside. You may still be functioning, working, showing up. But internally, everything feels like effort. There is no ease, no flow, just pressure and fatigue. Because others can't see it, you assume the problem must be personal. You assume something is wrong with you. But nothing is wrong with you. Mental exhaustion is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign that you've been strong for a long time without enough recovery. It's what happens when you push yourself through stress instead of processing it. When you suppress emotions instead of releasing them. When you keep going because stopping doesn't feel like an option. Your mind, like your body, has limits. When those limits are ignored, the system compensates. Motivation fades. Focus weakens. Energy drops. This is not failure. It's feedback. Yet instead of listening to that feedback, many people respond with criticism. They tell themselves to try harder, to be more disciplined, to push through. Unfortunately, this only deepens the exhaustion. Pressure does not create energy. Understanding does. There is a quiet relief that comes when you realize you are not lazy. That relief doesn't fix everything instantly, but it opens a door. It replaces shame with curiosity. Instead of asking, "Why can't I get my life together?" you begin to ask, "What has been draining me?" That question is powerful because it leads to solutions instead of self-attack. Another reason this lie feels so convincing is comparison. You see others moving forward, posting achievements, staying consistent. You don't see their private struggles or their support systems. You only see your own fatigue. And in that comparison, you conclude you must be lacking something essential. But progress is not always visible, and exhaustion is not a moral failing. The truth is, mentally exhausted people often care deeply. They overthink because they want to do things right. They feel pressure because they don't want to fall short. They push themselves because they believe they should be capable of more. This caring, when unmanaged, turns into self-neglect. And self-neglect, over time, leads to burnout. Calling yourself lazy doesn't motivate you. It disconnects you from yourself. It creates an inner conflict where one part of you demands performance while another part is begging for rest. That internal battle consumes even more energy. Healing begins when the battle stops. This chapter is not asking you to give up on your goals. It's asking you to stop attacking yourself for struggling. Growth does not come from self-hatred. It comes from self-awareness. When you understand that your lack of energy has a cause, you stop seeing yourself as the problem. And when you stop being the enemy, recovery becomes possible. For now, let this truth settle gently. You are not lazy. You are tired in a way that deserves compassion, patience, and care. In the next chapter, we'll explore how this exhaustion slowly builds and why so many capable people don't realize what's happening until they feel completely stuck. This is not the end of your motivation. It's the beginning of understanding it. Chapter 2: How Mental Exhaustion Slowly Builds. Mental exhaustion rarely announces itself loudly. It doesn't arrive in a single moment or through one dramatic event. Instead, it accumulates quietly, almost invisibly, through the everyday demands of life. This is why so many people don't recognize it until they feel completely drained and disconnected from themselves. They assume something suddenly went wrong, when in reality, the exhaustion has been building for a long time. It often begins with pressure. Not extreme pressure at first, just enough to keep you alert. You take on responsibilities, expectations, and roles that require constant attention. You tell yourself this is normal, that everyone feels this way. So you adapt. You push a little harder. You ignore the early signs of fatigue because slowing down feels irresponsible. Over time, what once felt manageable becomes heavy, but by then, the habit of pushing through is already deeply ingrained. One of the most common sources of mental exhaustion is the need to always be on. Your mind is rarely allowed to rest. Even during quiet moments, it's planning, worrying, replaying conversations, or anticipating problems. This constant mental activity keeps your nervous system in a state of alertness. When the mind never fully relaxes, it begins to wear itself down. The exhaustion that follows is not dramatic. It's dull, persistent, and deeply draining. Another powerful contributor is emotional suppression. Many people learn early in life that certain emotions are inconvenient or unwelcome. Sadness, frustration, fear, and disappointment are pushed aside in favor of functioning. You tell yourself you don't have time to feel, so you keep moving. But emotions don't disappear when ignored. They stay stored within the body and mind, quietly consuming energy. Over time, carrying unprocessed emotions becomes exhausting, even if you're not consciously aware of it. Mental exhaustion also grows from decision fatigue. Every day, you make hundreds of choices. Some are small, others are life-shaping. When your life is filled with uncertainty, responsibility, or pressure to make the right choice, your cognitive resources slowly deplete. The brain was never designed to operate under constant decision-making without rest. Eventually, it responds by reducing motivation and clarity, making even simple decisions feel overwhelming. Another layer comes from unmet emotional needs. Humans need understanding, connection, and validation. When these needs are consistently ignored or unmet, mental energy drains away. You may be surrounded by people and still feel alone. You may be accomplishing things and still feel unseen. That quiet emptiness adds to exhaustion in a way that is difficult to explain but deeply felt. Perfectionism plays a role as well. When you set high standards for yourself and tie your worth to performance, your mind is always under evaluation. Nothing feels good enough for long. Even achievements feel temporary because the focus quickly shifts to what's next. This constant self-monitoring creates internal tension that never fully releases. Over time, the mind becomes tired of trying to meet expectations that keep moving. Mental exhaustion also builds when you ignore your limits. You push past tiredness, emotional overwhelm, and stress because stopping feels like failure. You convince yourself that rest is something you'll earn later. But later never comes. Each time you override your needs, you send a message to yourself that your well-being is less important than productivity. That message, repeated over time, erodes mental resilience. One of the most confusing aspects of mental exhaustion is how normal it can feel. Because it builds gradually, you adapt to it. You don't realize how drained you are because you don't remember what it felt like to be truly rested and mentally clear. Exhaustion becomes your baseline. You continue functioning, but without joy, creativity, or enthusiasm. Life becomes something you manage rather than experience. Stress without recovery is another major factor. Stress itself is not harmful. In small doses, it can even be motivating. But when stress becomes constant and recovery is rare, the nervous system stays activated. Your body and mind never return to a state of balance. Over time, this leads to emotional numbness, irritability, and fatigue. The mind protects itself by pulling back energy from non-essential functions like motivation and focus. Mental exhaustion is also reinforced by self-judgment. When you start noticing your lack of energy, you criticize yourself for it. You tell yourself you should be doing more. This self-criticism adds another layer of mental strain. Instead of addressing the root cause, you pile shame on top of exhaustion. This creates a cycle where exhaustion leads to self-attack, which leads to deeper exhaustion. What makes this process especially painful is that it often affects capable, responsible people. Those who care deeply. Those who try their best. They don't collapse because they are weak. They slowly wear down because they don't know how to stop. Understanding how mental exhaustion builds is not about assigning blame. It's about recognizing patterns. When you see that exhaustion is the result of accumulated pressure, emotional neglect, and constant demand, you stop seeing it as a personal failure. You begin to see it as a natural response to prolonged overload. This awareness is the beginning of change. You cannot undo the past, but you can stop adding to the exhaustion. You can start listening to the signals your mind has been sending quietly for a long time. In the next chapter, we'll explore why rest alone often doesn't fix mental exhaustion and what kind of recovery actually leads to renewal. For now, know this: nothing about your exhaustion is random. It was built, layer by layer, through circumstances and habits that made sense at the time. And what was built can also be gently undone. Chapter 3: Why Rest Alone Doesn't Fix It. When mental exhaustion sets in, the most common advice you hear is simple: get some rest, sleep more, take a break, step away for a while. And while rest is important, many people discover something frustrating and confusing when they finally slow down. They rest, but they still feel tired. They sleep, but they wake up heavy. They take time off, yet the sense of exhaustion remains. This leads to a painful conclusion that something must be deeply wrong with them. But the truth is, rest alone often doesn't fix mental exhaustion because mental exhaustion is not just about being physically tired. Mental exhaustion lives in the mind and nervous system. It comes from prolonged emotional pressure, unresolved thoughts, and constant mental activity. When you lie down to rest, your body may relax, but your mind often keeps working. Thoughts continue. Worries surface. Memories replay. Plans form. The nervous system stays alert, even in stillness. This is why you can feel drained despite doing nothing. Your system hasn't actually turned off. Many people confuse physical rest with mental recovery. Physical rest means giving your body a break from movement and exertion. Mental recovery requires something different. It requires safety, emotional release, and a sense that nothing is being demanded from you. Without those conditions, your mind remains in a defensive state. It's like leaving a car engine running while parked. Even though you're not going anywhere, energy is still being used. Another reason rest doesn't fix mental exhaustion is guilt. When you rest while feeling behind, your mind doesn't interpret that rest as recovery. It interprets it as danger. Thoughts like, I should be doing something, or I'm wasting time, keep the stress response active. So even during downtime, you're mentally working. True recovery cannot happen when rest feels unsafe or undeserved. Mental exhaustion is also fueled by unresolved emotions. If you've been suppressing frustration, sadness, anger, or disappointment, those emotions don't disappear when you stop working. They surface in quiet moments. This can make rest uncomfortable. Instead of feeling relief, you feel restlessness or unease. So you distract yourself. You scroll. You watch something. You keep your mind busy to avoid feeling. But distraction is not recovery. It's avoidance. And avoidance continues the exhaustion. Another factor is the loss of internal clarity. When your mind has been overloaded for a long time, it loses its sense of direction. You may not be sure what you want, what matters, or where you're headed. This uncertainty creates mental tension. Even when you rest, your mind keeps searching for answers. That searching is exhausting. Without clarity, rest feels incomplete. Mental exhaustion also affects the nervous system's ability to regulate itself. When you've been under stress for too long, your nervous system adapts by staying on high alert. This becomes your default state. Relaxation starts to feel unfamiliar. Silence can feel uncomfortable. Stillness can create anxiety. So even when you want to rest, your system doesn't know how. It has forgotten what safety feels like. This is why many people say they feel more tired after resting. Rest removes distractions, and what's underneath finally becomes noticeable. This isn't a sign that rest is failing. It's a sign that something deeper needs attention. Rest opens the door, but healing requires walking through it. Another misconception is that rest should instantly restore motivation. People expect that after a break, they should feel ready to go again. When that doesn't happen, they assume rest didn't work. But motivation doesn't return instantly. It returns gradually as trust, clarity, and emotional balance are restored. Rest is the beginning, not the solution by itself. Mental exhaustion also persists when life returns to the same patterns that caused it. You rest for a short time, then go back to the same pressure, expectations, and habits. This creates a cycle where exhaustion briefly eases and then returns. Without addressing the root causes, rest becomes a temporary pause rather than a true reset. There's also the issue of overstimulation. Even during rest, many people stay mentally stimulated through screens, noise, and constant information. The brain doesn't get a chance to slow down. It remains in consumption mode. True mental recovery often requires moments of simplicity, silence, and low stimulation. These moments can feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you're used to constant input, but they are essential for healing. Understanding why rest alone doesn't fix mental exhaustion can feel discouraging, but it's actually empowering. It means you're not failing at resting. It means your exhaustion has depth, and depth requires care, not force. Healing mental exhaustion is not about doing nothing. It's about doing the right things in the right way. Mental recovery begins when you allow your mind to feel safe enough to let go. That safety comes from compassion rather than pressure, from honesty rather than avoidance, from small changes that reduce overload rather than dramatic attempts to fix everything at once. In the next chapter, we'll explore one of the biggest contributors to mental exhaustion in modern life, the pressure to always be productive and constantly improving. Understanding this pressure helps you loosen its grip and reclaim your energy without guilt. For now, let yourself release the idea that you should feel better just because you rested. Healing doesn't follow a schedule. It follows understanding. And understanding is exactly where you are now. Chapter 4: The Pressure to Always Be Productive. There is a quiet rule many people live by without ever questioning it. Your value is measured by what you produce. Your worth is tied to how much you accomplish. Rest is something you earn only after everything is done. This belief sits so deep in modern life that it feels normal, even responsible. But over time, it becomes one of the strongest sources of mental exhaustion. From a young age, many of us are taught that being busy is a virtue. Praise comes when you achieve, perform, and stay ahead. Slowing down is often framed as laziness or lack of ambition. As adults, this lesson follows us everywhere. Even during moments meant for rest, the mind keeps track of unfinished tasks. Productivity becomes an internal pressure, not just an external demand. This pressure doesn't always come from work alone. It seeps into personal growth, relationships, and even self-care. You're encouraged to constantly improve, optimize, and upgrade yourself. There's always another habit to build, another goal to chase, another version of yourself to become. While growth can be healthy, constant self-improvement without rest turns into self-rejection. You begin to live with the feeling that who you are right now is never enough. When productivity becomes tied to identity, rest feels threatening. Slowing down triggers guilt. Doing nothing feels wrong. You may sit still physically, but mentally you're rehearsing what you should be doing. This internal pressure keeps the nervous system activated. Your mind never fully relaxes because it believes there's always something more required of you. One of the most exhausting aspects of productivity culture is comparison. You see others achieving milestones, sharing progress, and appearing disciplined. You rarely see their struggles, burnout, or support systems. But your mind compares your internal fatigue to their external success. This comparison fuels self-judgment. You assume you're falling behind. That belief creates anxiety, which drains even more mental energy. The pressure to be productive also leaves little room for emotional processing. Feelings that don't directly contribute to output are often pushed aside. Sadness, confusion, and doubt are seen as obstacles rather than signals. So you keep moving, hoping productivity will eventually silence discomfort. But ignoring emotions doesn't make them disappear. It adds to the mental load. Another hidden cost of constant productivity is the loss of presence. When your mind is always focused on what's next, you miss what's happening now. Life becomes a series of tasks rather than experiences. Joy feels brief. Satisfaction fades quickly. You accomplish things, but fulfillment remains distant. This disconnect creates a sense of emptiness that no amount of productivity can fill. Mental exhaustion grows when effort is never balanced with appreciation. You do a lot, but rarely acknowledge it. You move from one task to the next without pause. Your mind doesn't get the message that it's safe to stop. Without moments of completion and recognition, the brain stays in survival mode. It's always preparing, always pushing. Productivity pressure also ignores the natural rhythms of energy. Humans are not designed to operate at the same intensity all the time. Energy rises and falls. Creativity needs space. Focus needs rest. When you force yourself to be productive regardless of your mental state, you override these rhythms. Over time, this leads to burnout. The mind eventually shuts down to protect itself. Many people try to fix mental exhaustion by becoming more disciplined. They create stricter schedules, set higher goals, and push harder. But discipline without compassion becomes punishment. It turns your life into a constant performance. Instead of supporting your well-being, productivity becomes something you fear failing at. There is also the belief that slowing down means giving up. That if you rest, you'll lose momentum or fall behind permanently. This fear keeps people trapped in exhaustion. But rest doesn't erase progress. It preserves it. Sustainable growth requires cycles of effort and recovery. Without recovery, effort loses its effectiveness. The pressure to always be productive often comes from deeper fears. Fear of being judged. Fear of being left behind. Fear of not being enough. Productivity becomes a way to feel safe and valuable. But safety built on constant effort is fragile. The moment you slow down, it disappears. True safety comes from knowing your worth is not dependent on constant output. Releasing this pressure doesn't mean abandoning ambition. It means redefining success. Success is not just what you achieve, but how you feel while achieving it. A life that constantly drains you is not successful, no matter how impressive it looks from the outside. Mental exhaustion begins to ease when you give yourself permission to exist without producing. When rest becomes a necessity rather than a reward. When you allow moments of stillness without labeling them as wasted time. These shifts may feel uncomfortable at first because they challenge deeply ingrained beliefs, but they are essential for healing. In the next chapter, we'll explore another major source of mental exhaustion, the emotional weight you've been carrying without realizing it. Understanding this weight helps explain why your mind feels heavy even when your schedule doesn't look overwhelming. For now, let yourself question the pressure you live under. You were never meant to be productive every moment of your life. You were meant to be human. Chapter 5: Emotional Weight You Never Put Down. Not all exhaustion comes from what you do. Some of it comes from what you carry. Emotional weight is one of the most overlooked sources of mental exhaustion because it doesn't show up on schedules or to-do lists. It lives quietly beneath the surface, influencing your energy, focus, and motivation without asking for attention. Over time, this unseen weight becomes heavy enough to slow everything down. Emotional weight often begins with experiences that were never fully processed. Disappointments you didn't have time to feel. Losses you were expected to move on from quickly. Situations where you had to stay strong instead of expressing how deeply something affected you. At the time, suppressing emotions may have felt necessary. Life doesn't always allow space for reflection. But emotions don't vanish when ignored. They remain stored in the mind and body, quietly consuming energy. Many people confuse emotional strength with emotional suppression. They believe that feeling less means functioning better. So they push feelings aside in order to stay productive and responsible. But unexpressed emotions don't stay neutral. They create tension. They occupy mental space. They demand energy to keep contained. Over time, this internal effort leads to fatigue that has no obvious cause. Emotional weight also comes from unresolved relationships. Words left unsaid. Boundaries not honored. Roles you've been stuck in for too long. When you consistently put others' needs above your own, resentment and sadness build quietly. You may not consciously dwell on these feelings, but your nervous system remembers. Carrying emotional imbalance for extended periods drains mental resilience. Another source of emotional weight is self-criticism. The way you speak to yourself matters more than most people realize. Constant internal judgment creates emotional pressure that never fully releases. Every mistake, delay, or perceived failure adds another layer. Over time, your inner world becomes a place of tension rather than support. Living inside that environment is exhausting. Past experiences also contribute to emotional weight. Memories of rejection, failure, or betrayal can shape how you move through the present. Even if you rarely think about them, they influence your expectations and reactions. Your mind stays guarded, always preparing for disappointment. That constant vigilance consumes energy, even when nothing is actively wrong. Emotional weight can also come from unmet needs. The need to feel understood, valued, and connected. When these needs go unmet for long periods, the mind feels empty and strained at the same time. You may function well externally while feeling internally depleted. This disconnect creates confusion and exhaustion. You wonder why you feel tired when your life looks manageable. One of the most exhausting aspects of emotional weight is how invisible it is. Others may see you as capable and stable. You may even see yourself that way. But internally, you are holding too much without release. Because there's no clear event to point to, you blame yourself. You assume the exhaustion means you're weak or unmotivated. In reality, you've been carrying emotional responsibilities that were never meant to be held indefinitely. Emotional weight is also intensified by the belief that you should be over it by now. Society often sets timelines for healing that ignore individual experience. When you don't meet those expectations, you feel pressure to move on faster than your system is ready for. This pressure creates resistance. Resistance increases exhaustion. Letting go of emotional weight doesn't mean reliving every painful moment. It means allowing yourself to acknowledge what you've been carrying. It means giving emotions permission to exist without judgment. Healing begins with honesty. When you stop pretending something didn't affect you, your mind can begin to release it. Many people fear that feeling emotions will overwhelm them. But emotions lose their intensity when they are acknowledged rather than suppressed. What overwhelms the system is not feeling, but holding. When emotions are expressed safely and gradually, they create relief, not chaos. Emotional release doesn't always require dramatic expression. Sometimes it's quiet, reflection, writing, speaking honestly with someone you trust. Even simply naming what you feel can reduce its weight. These small acts signal to your nervous system that it no longer has to carry everything alone. Mental exhaustion begins to ease when emotional weight is reduced. Energy returns not because life becomes easier, but because the internal load becomes lighter. You begin to notice moments of clarity. Small tasks feel less heavy. Motivation appears gently, without force. In the next chapter, we'll explore why motivation feels impossible when you're mentally exhausted and why forcing discipline often makes things worse. Understanding this helps you work with your energy instead of against it. For now, allow yourself to recognize the emotional weight you've been carrying. You don't need to drop it all at once. Even setting it down for a moment is enough to remind your mind what relief feels like. Chapter 6. Why motivation feels impossible. When mental exhaustion takes hold, motivation is often the first thing to disappear. This loss can feel frightening because motivation is commonly seen as the driving force behind progress. Without it, everything feels harder. You may look at tasks you once handled easily and feel resistance, confusion, or even numbness. This leads to a painful question: why can't I make myself care the way I used to? The truth is, motivation does not disappear without reason. It fades when the mind is depleted. Motivation is not an unlimited resource. It relies on emotional energy, clarity, and a sense of reward. When these elements are missing, motivation cannot sustain itself, no matter how disciplined you try to be. One of the biggest misunderstandings about motivation is the belief that it should come first. Many people wait to feel motivated before they act. But in a state of mental exhaustion, waiting only deepens the problem. At the same time, forcing action without understanding the exhaustion creates resistance. This creates an internal conflict where one part of you demands movement while another part is completely drained. Mental exhaustion disrupts the brain's reward system. Normally, effort is followed by a sense of satisfaction or progress. But when you're exhausted, effort feels disconnected from reward. You try, but the internal payoff is missing. This makes action feel pointless. Over time, your mind stops offering motivation because it no longer associates effort with positive outcomes. Another reason motivation feels impossible is emotional overload. When your emotional needs are unmet, your mind prioritizes survival over growth. Motivation is a higher-level function. It thrives when safety and stability are present. In exhaustion, the nervous system is focused on protection. It pulls energy away from motivation to preserve basic functioning. Self-criticism also plays a major role in killing motivation. When you constantly judge yourself for not doing enough, tasks become emotionally charged. Every action feels like a test of your worth. This pressure makes starting feel overwhelming. Instead of motivation, you feel anxiety. Instead of excitement, you feel dread. Over time, your mind avoids tasks to escape this emotional discomfort. Perfectionism further complicates motivation. When standards are too high, starting feels risky. If you can't do something perfectly, it feels safer not to do it at all. Mental exhaustion amplifies this fear. You don't have the energy to meet unrealistic expectations, so avoidance becomes a form of self-protection. Many people respond to this loss of motivation by trying to become more disciplined. They create stricter routines and push themselves harder. While discipline has value, discipline without emotional support feels like punishment. It turns life into a series of obligations rather than meaningful choices. This approach often increases exhaustion and deepens the motivation block. Motivation also suffers when life feels misaligned. If your daily actions don't reflect your values or desires, your mind resists investing energy. You may be working toward goals that no longer resonate or maintaining routines that drain you. Mental exhaustion makes this misalignment more noticeable. Your lack of motivation is not a failure. It's information. Another overlooked factor is grief. Grief doesn't only come from loss. It comes from unmet expectations, missed opportunities, and versions of yourself you had to let go of. Grief consumes emotional energy. When grief is unacknowledged, motivation struggles to exist alongside it. Rebuilding motivation requires a shift in approach. Instead of demanding motivation, you create conditions for it to return. This begins with reducing pressure, lowering expectations, allowing imperfect progress. When tasks feel safer, your mind becomes more willing to engage. Small actions matter more than big goals during exhaustion. Motivation often follows movement, not the other way around. Gentle action creates momentum without overwhelming the system. The goal is not to push yourself back to who you were, but to support who you are now. Compassion is essential. When you treat yourself with understanding, resistance softens. Motivation returns when your mind feels supported rather than threatened. This doesn't mean giving up on growth. It means choosing a sustainable path toward it. Mental exhaustion teaches an important lesson. Motivation is not something you force. It's something you invite. You invite it by caring for your emotional needs, honoring your limits, and aligning your actions with what truly matters to you. In the next chapter, we'll explore how to rebuild trust with yourself after exhaustion has damaged your confidence and consistency. That trust is the foundation motivation needs to grow again. For now, release the idea that something is wrong with you because motivation feels distant. Your system is asking for recovery, not punishment. And listening to that request is the most motivated act you can make right now. Chapter 7. Rebuilding Trust with Yourself. One of the quietest but deepest wounds mental exhaustion creates is the loss of trust in yourself. At first, it's subtle. You plan to do something and don't follow through. You tell yourself you'll start tomorrow, but tomorrow comes and goes. Over time, these small breaks in commitment add up. You begin to doubt your own words. You stop believing yourself when you make promises. And without realizing it, your confidence erodes from the inside. Self-trust is not about being perfect or always following a plan. It's about knowing that when you commit to something, you will show up in some way. Mental exhaustion disrupts this relationship because it reduces your capacity to act consistently. The problem is not a lack of character. It's a lack of energy. But when energy is low and expectations remain high, disappointment becomes frequent. Each time you fail to meet an expectation you set for yourself, you feel a quiet sense of shame. Even if you don't consciously acknowledge it, your mind remembers. Eventually, making plans feels pointless because you don't trust yourself to follow through. This creates hesitation. You stop starting things. You avoid committing. You protect yourself from disappointment by lowering belief in yourself. Rebuilding self-trust requires a shift in how you relate to yourself. It begins with understanding that broken promises were not intentional. You didn't fail because you didn't care. You failed because you were exhausted. When you replace judgment with understanding, you create space for repair. Trust is rebuilt through consistency, not intensity. Grand promises don't heal self-trust. Small, manageable commitments do. When you set expectations that match your current energy, you give yourself the chance to succeed. Each small follow-through sends a message to your nervous system. I can rely on myself again. Mental exhaustion often causes people to swing between extremes. Either they push themselves too hard or they give up completely. Neither approach rebuilds trust. Balance does. Balance means choosing actions that stretch you slightly without overwhelming you. It means respecting your limits while still moving forward. Another important aspect of self-trust is listening to yourself. Many people are disconnected from their internal signals. They override tiredness, discomfort, and emotional needs in the name of productivity. Over time, this teaches your mind that its signals don't matter. Rebuilding trust means paying attention. When your body and mind communicate, you respond with care rather than dismissal. Boundaries play a major role in self-trust. Every time you say yes when you mean no, you weaken the relationship with yourself. You send the message that your needs are negotiable. Over time, this creates resentment and exhaustion. Learning to honor your boundaries strengthens self-trust because it proves that you will protect yourself when necessary. Self-trust also grows when you stop comparing your pace to others. Comparison creates unrealistic standards that undermine confidence. Your journey is shaped by your experiences, energy, and circumstances. Measuring yourself against others only distorts your sense of progress. Trust grows when you define success on your own terms. Mental exhaustion can make you feel unreliable, but this is not your true nature. It's a temporary state. When energy returns, so does consistency. The key is to rebuild gradually instead of expecting immediate change. Patience is not weakness. It's a form of self-respect. Another way to rebuild trust is through self-compassion. This doesn't mean excusing everything. It means speaking to yourself the way you would speak to someone you care about. When mistakes happen, you respond with understanding rather than attack. This creates an internal environment where growth feels safe. Clarity also strengthens self-trust. When your goals are vague or misaligned, it's harder to follow through. Taking time to reflect on what truly matters to you helps you make commitments that feel meaningful. Meaningful commitments are easier to honor because they resonate with your values. Rebuilding trust also involves forgiveness. You may need to forgive yourself for periods of inaction, inconsistency, or burnout. Holding on to guilt keeps you stuck. Forgiveness frees energy. It allows you to move forward without carrying the weight of past struggles. As self-trust returns, confidence grows quietly. Not the loud, performative kind, but a steady inner confidence. You begin to believe that even if things are difficult, you can handle them. This belief is powerful. It supports motivation, resilience, and emotional stability. In the next chapter, we'll explore how to slow down without guilt and why learning to rest intentionally is essential for long-term recovery. Slowing down is not the opposite of progress. It's often what makes progress possible. For now, remember this: you don't need to become someone new to trust yourself again. You need to reconnect with who you've always been, beneath the exhaustion. And that reconnection begins with kindness. Chapter 8: Learning to Slow Down Without Guilt. One of the hardest lessons to learn in a world that rewards speed is that slowing down is not failure. For many people, rest feels uncomfortable. Stillness feels lazy. Pausing feels like falling behind. This mindset doesn't come from truth. It comes from conditioning. From a young age, you were taught that productivity equals worth and movement equals progress. Over time, this belief becomes so deeply ingrained that even when your mind and body are exhausted, you feel guilty for slowing down. Mental exhaustion often worsens because rest is treated as something you must earn. You tell yourself you'll rest after you finish everything, after you catch up, after you prove you're doing enough. But the finish line keeps moving. There is always more to do. And so rest gets postponed indefinitely, while exhaustion quietly grows. Slowing down is not about quitting life. It's about adjusting your pace to match your capacity. When you move faster than your nervous system can handle, stress accumulates. When stress accumulates without release, it turns into burnout, anxiety, and emotional numbness. Slowing down is how you release that pressure before it causes damage. Guilt around rest often comes from fear. Fear of being judged. Fear of being replaced. Fear of losing momentum. Fear of confronting emotions that surface in stillness. Constant busyness becomes a distraction from inner discomfort. When you slow down, you're forced to feel what you've been avoiding. This can be unsettling at first, but it's also where healing begins. Rest is not only physical. Mental rest is just as important. Even when your body is still, your mind may be racing. Slowing down mentally means reducing overstimulation. It means creating space where your thoughts can settle. Silence, nature, and simple routines help regulate your nervous system and bring clarity. Intentional rest is different from collapse. Collapse happens when exhaustion forces you to stop. Intentional rest happens when you choose to pause before reaching that breaking point. This kind of rest is proactive, not reactive. It preserves your energy instead of trying to recover it after it's gone. Many people struggle with slowing down because their identity is tied to achievement. When you stop doing, you feel like you stop being. But your worth does not disappear when you rest. You are valuable even when you're still. Learning this truth is uncomfortable at first, but deeply freeing. Slowing down also improves decision-making. When your mind is constantly rushed, you react instead of respond. You make choices based on urgency rather than alignment. Pausing allows you to think clearly. It gives you perspective. It helps you see what truly matters and what can wait. There is also a physical component to slowing down. Chronic stress keeps your body in survival mode. Your muscles stay tense. Your breathing becomes shallow. Your digestion slows. Rest signals safety to your nervous system. It tells your body that it's okay to relax. Over time, this reduces anxiety and restores balance. Learning to slow down requires permission. And that permission must come from you. Waiting for external validation only reinforces guilt. You don't need to justify rest by being exhausted enough. Rest is a basic human need, not a reward. One helpful shift is redefining productivity. Productivity doesn't mean doing more. It means doing what matters with presence and intention. Sometimes the most productive thing you can do is rest so you can show up fully later. Energy management matters more than time management. Slowing down also helps you reconnect with yourself. When life is fast, you lose touch with your inner voice. You move from one task to another without reflection. Stillness creates awareness. It helps you notice your emotions, your needs, and your desires. This self-awareness strengthens emotional resilience. Another important aspect is letting go of comparison. When you compare your pace to others, slowing down feels like losing. But everyone's capacity is different. What looks like success on the outside may hide burnout on the inside. Your pace is valid even if it doesn't match anyone else's. Rest doesn't always mean doing nothing. It can mean doing something gentle. Reading, walking, listening to music, or simply sitting quietly. The key is choosing activities that restore rather than drain. Pay attention to how you feel afterward. That awareness will guide you. Slowing down also improves creativity. When your mind is constantly busy, creativity gets blocked. Ideas need space to form. Silence allows insight. Many breakthroughs happen not when you push harder, but when you step back. There will be resistance at first. Your mind may tell you that slowing down is dangerous or irresponsible. These thoughts are habits, not facts. You don't have to believe every thought you have. With practice, the guilt fades and is replaced by trust. Trust that resting will not ruin your life. Trust that slowing down will not make you irrelevant. Trust that taking care of yourself will not make you weak. In reality, rest makes you more resilient, more focused, and more emotionally stable. Slowing down is an act of self-respect. It's a way of saying, my well-being matters. When you honor that truth, mental strength grows naturally. Not from force, but from balance. In the next chapter, we'll explore how to face uncertainty without panic and why learning to sit with the unknown is a powerful skill in an unpredictable life. Chapter 9. Facing uncertainty without losing yourself. Uncertainty has a way of shaking even the strongest minds. When life feels unstable, the need for control intensifies. You want answers, timelines, guarantees. You want to know how things will turn out so you can relax. But life rarely offers certainty on demand. And when uncertainty lingers, it can trigger anxiety, overthinking, and emotional exhaustion. Mental strength is not about eliminating uncertainty. It's about learning how to live with it without losing your sense of self. The problem isn't uncertainty itself. It's how your mind responds to it. When uncertainty is perceived as a threat, your nervous system stays in a constant state of alert. Over time, this drains your energy and weakens your resilience. The human brain is wired to seek patterns and predict outcomes. This helped our ancestors survive. But in modern life, this same instinct can backfire. When you can't predict the future, your mind fills the gap with worst-case scenarios. You replay conversations. You imagine failures. You try to think your way out of the unknown. Instead of gaining clarity, you end up more overwhelmed. Facing uncertainty begins with recognizing what you can and cannot control. Many people waste energy trying to control outcomes, other people's behavior, or future events. This effort creates frustration because it's impossible. Mental peace comes from focusing on what is within your influence, your actions, your responses, and your mindset. One of the hardest parts of uncertainty is the feeling of helplessness. You want to do something, but there's nothing concrete to act on. This can make you feel stuck. The key is shifting from outcome-focused thinking to process-focused thinking. You may not know where you're going, but you can decide how you show up today. Uncertainty also challenges your identity. When plans fall apart or roles change, you may question who you are. If your sense of self is tied to specific outcomes, uncertainty feels like losing yourself. Strength comes from grounding your identity in values rather than circumstances. Values remain steady even when life doesn't. Another important step is learning to tolerate discomfort. Uncertainty feels uncomfortable because it removes predictability. Many people try to escape this discomfort through distractions, constant planning, or avoidance. While these strategies provide temporary relief, they don't build resilience. Sitting with discomfort, without rushing to fix it, trains your nervous system to remain calm under pressure. Mindfulness is especially helpful when facing uncertainty. It brings your attention back to the present moment, where life is actually happening. Anxiety lives in the future. Regret lives in the past. Peace exists in the now. When you anchor yourself in the present, uncertainty loses some of its power. Language also matters. The way you talk to yourself during uncertain times shapes your emotional response. If your inner dialogue is filled with catastrophic predictions, your stress increases. Replacing these thoughts with neutral or compassionate statements helps regulate your emotions. You don't need false positivity. You need realism and self-support. Trust plays a crucial role in navigating uncertainty. Not trust that everything will work out perfectly, but trust that you can handle whatever happens. This kind of trust builds mental strength. It reduces fear because it shifts focus from outcomes to capability. Uncertainty also invites growth. It pushes you out of autopilot. It forces reflection. It challenges assumptions. Many personal transformations begin in uncertain periods. While uncomfortable, these moments often lead to deeper self-awareness and resilience. Another challenge is resisting the urge to rush decisions. When uncertainty feels unbearable, people often make quick choices just to escape discomfort. This can lead to regret. Learning to pause, gather information, and reflect helps you make decisions aligned with your values rather than fear. Support is also important. Facing uncertainty alone can amplify stress. Sharing your thoughts with someone you trust can bring perspective. It reminds you that you're not isolated. Sometimes, being heard is more helpful than receiving advice. Uncertainty teaches patience. It reminds you that not everything unfolds on your timeline. Learning to wait without losing hope is a powerful skill. It strengthens emotional endurance and reduces impulsivity. Another helpful practice is focusing on small, controllable actions. When the future feels overwhelming, narrow your focus. Ask yourself what you can do today to support yourself. Small steps restore a sense of agency and reduce helplessness. Acceptance is not resignation. Accepting uncertainty doesn't mean giving up. It means acknowledging reality without resistance. Resistance increases suffering. Acceptance creates space for clarity and action. Over time, as you face uncertainty repeatedly, confidence grows. You realize that you've survived unknowns before. You've adapted. You've learned. This realization builds trust in yourself and reduces fear. In the next chapter, we'll explore how to create emotional stability even when life remains unpredictable and why inner steadiness matters more than external certainty. Chapter 10: Creating Inner Stability in an Unstable World. In a world that is constantly changing, waiting for life to become calm before you feel steady is a losing strategy. Circumstances shift. Plans change. People come and go. If your sense of stability depends entirely on external conditions, you will always feel off balance. Mental strength comes from building inner stability, something that remains steady even when the outside world does not. Inner stability doesn't mean emotional numbness or detachment. It means having a grounded center you can return to when things feel chaotic. It's the ability to experience emotions without being consumed by them. It's knowing that even when life feels unpredictable, you are anchored within yourself. One of the foundations of inner stability is self-awareness. When you understand your emotional patterns, triggers, and needs, you're less likely to be thrown off by external events. Awareness allows you to respond instead of react. It creates a pause between stimulus and response, where choice exists. Routine also plays a powerful role in emotional stability. Simple daily rituals, waking up at the same time, eating regularly, moving your body, or spending a few quiet moments alone, send signals of safety to your nervous system. When the world feels unpredictable, these small consistencies provide grounding. Inner stability is strengthened by emotional regulation. This doesn't mean suppressing feelings. It means allowing emotions to move through you without judgment. When you resist emotions, they intensify. When you acknowledge them, they lose their grip. Naming what you feel helps your brain process it more effectively. Another key element is perspective. When life feels overwhelming, your mind tends to zoom in on immediate problems. Everything feels urgent and permanent. Stepping back helps you see the bigger picture. Reminding yourself that situations are temporary reduces emotional intensity and restores balance. Mental boundaries are just as important as physical ones. Constant exposure to negative news, social media comparison, or emotionally draining interactions destabilizes your inner world. Protecting your mental space allows you to maintain clarity and emotional balance. Inner stability also grows when you align your actions with your values. When your behavior reflects what matters to you, you feel more grounded. Even when outcomes are uncertain, acting in alignment with your values gives you a sense of integrity and self-respect. Another often overlooked aspect is self-talk. Your internal dialogue shapes your emotional experience. Harsh self-criticism weakens stability. Supportive, realistic self-talk strengthens it. The way you speak to yourself during challenges can either calm or escalate your stress. Rest and recovery are non-negotiable for inner stability. Exhaustion lowers emotional tolerance. When you're tired, small problems feel overwhelming. Prioritizing rest isn't indulgence, it's maintenance. It allows your nervous system to reset and your mind to regain clarity. Inner stability is also connected to acceptance. Life will never be fully controllable. Accepting this truth reduces resistance. Resistance creates tension. Acceptance creates peace. When you stop fighting reality, you conserve energy and gain clarity. Another powerful practice is grounding in the present moment. When anxiety pulls you into future worries, returning to your senses, what you see, hear, and feel, brings you back to now. The present moment is often more manageable than the imagined future. Building inner stability takes time. It's not a one-time achievement. It's a practice. Some days will feel easier than others. Progress isn't linear. What matters is consistency, not perfection. Inner stability also allows you to support others without losing yourself. When you're grounded, you can offer presence without absorbing stress. This is especially important in relationships, where emotional boundaries protect your well-being. As inner stability grows, resilience follows. You become more adaptable. Challenges don't disappear, but your ability to face them improves. You recover faster. You trust yourself more. Ultimately, inner stability is about self-connection. It's knowing who you are beyond circumstances. It's trusting that no matter what happens, you can find your footing again. This concludes the journey of this book. Mental strength isn't about never feeling overwhelmed or unfairly treated. It's about developing the tools to stay grounded, resilient, and compassionate with yourself when life tests you. And those tools are already within you, waiting to be practiced.